Okay. So our index is a three-part calculation. It's based on three critical aspects of the river. The first is the coverage of submerged aquatic vegetation. So these are the rooted plants, the true plants that grow in the shallow water of the creeks and of the river that are really critical for habitat, for fish. Crabs like to go in there to molt. And they also provide food for waterfowl, being plants during the day. They produce oxygen. And they also tend to help to hold the sediments in place along the shoreline when they're growing when there's enough of them growing there. They will really hold sediments in place. And if you're out on the water and there's a boat wake, you can see as soon as the boat wake hits where the grasses are, it's really calmed down. So it really helps protect the banks from erosion. So we look for the presence of grasses. We get most of our data on the coverage of grasses from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. They fly over the river every year, and then using aerial photographs, they determine where the grasses are. And I'll show you their map in a moment. And also we do get some data from Bayland. Bayland is here doing a display. And whenever they do creeks in the Magothy for the county. And so when they get data on grasses, we're able to use those data. So the second parameter is water clarity. And we measure that with a Secchi disc. You can see here we have our county executive holding the Secchi disc. He learned how to use it that day. And so we lower that into the water, and we look to see how far down in the water we can see it. And we're looking for 1 meter depth. We would like to see it go down at least 1 meter and still be able to see it. Any more than that is great. So that's about 3 feet. And that's essential because that's what the grasses need to grow. So we look for water clarity. And we also look for dissolved oxygen just above the bottom, because that's where critters that can't move, like oysters, for instance, once they're settled on the bottom, they can't travel. So they need, they can survive in less than 5 milligrams per liter, but 5 milligrams per liter or more is ideal for oysters and for fish. So this would be really good habitat if we could have that much oxygen in the deep water. So these are the three criteria that make up our index. Here's some of our volunteers out sampling. So here's the Secchi disc they're using, and here's one of our meters here. The probe goes into the water, and she's got a handheld meter here. And so what we do is we look at the percent attainment of each of those three criteria. So the Bay program says we should have, I guess, 379 acres of grass to be in fabulous shape. So we look, how close do we get to that number? The dissolved oxygen, we're looking to see what percent of the time we have the 5 milligrams per liter on the bottom. And for water clarity, we're looking what percent of the time do we achieve that 1 meter clarity. So we take those three parameters, figure out what the average is for the entire watershed, and then average them, and that gives us our final index. So that's what I want to show you here. And you have this on your newsletter also, so you can take a look at that if you like. So here we have the index for the last 16 years. So what we're looking at here is the percent attainment. So if we have good oxygen levels on the bottom, half of the time, we would have a value up around here. So let's look at the oxygen first, because that's always the best story. So the dark blue here is the oxygen sitting on the bottom. And we see that this year, it actually has gone up, and even the year before it went up. So we have an increase in the bottom dissolved oxygen for the last 2 years, so that's great. The second line I want to take a look at is the light blue line. So that is the Secchi disc depth, measuring water clarity. So you can see that it hasn't been great for a period of time here. We've had really low water clarity. It's been better since 2014, and it actually went up in 22. So we have an improvement also in water clarity. And then finally the grasses. Again, you can see the grasses were really down here in the doldrums for this period of time, but they came up last year. We went from like 60 acres to 80 acres, so we saw an improvement. So that pink dotted line is just the average of the three. What we can say here is that we're at about, this is about a 30%. Yeah, it is 30% for this year. So actually, on the scale that we use, that makes it a D. So it's not fabulous, but it's an improvement, and that's what we're looking for. So we have to celebrate a little bit of improvement, anyway, that we're seeing here. All right, now, the question is, why isn't the river in better shape? And the problems for, say, for instance, water clarity are twofold, primarily in the river. One is sediments that would be washed into the river after a rain, particularly if there's been construction. And also, the other reason why we'd have poor water clarity would be the growth of algae. And anybody who spends any time on the river has seen the algal blooms that we get. Often it's that mahogany tide. And so that makes the water quite dark. And it makes it very difficult for the algae to, for the grasses to grow. And then, of course, when the algae die, they only live about 2 weeks. They have a short lifetime, so they grow in great abundance. After about 2 weeks, they die off. They settle on the bottom, and then they're decomposed by the bacteria and fungi on the bottom, using up oxygen at that time. So that brings down the dissolved oxygen on the bottom. So having these blooms of algae is definitely problematic. So, and the reason why we get these blooms of algae is because we have too many nutrients in the river. And the two nutrients that we are most concerned about are nitrogen and phosphorus. And so we have too much of both in our river. So these are the sources then of problems for the algae. And then the sediments themselves, well, they're going to come in through stormwater, particularly after construction, but in any area where there's, sand that is not covered with something green growing there to hold it in place, those sediments will wash into the river. So here's an example. This is the headwaters of Cattail Creek after a big storm, and there was some construction upstream. And, we get this water that looks like, people call it chocolate milk after a heavy rain. And these sediments are very fine in many cases. There is some sand that'll drop off pretty quickly, but there's also silt and clay that will stay suspended in the water column for days, maybe a week. So that definitely is a problem for not only water clarity, but it also tends to clog the gills of critters that are trying to breathe oxygen out of the water. Their gills get clogged with sediments. So now where do these nutrients come from? Well, a lot of them are coming into our waterway through the septic systems that are in our watershed. So what you can see here is a view of the, very delicate, is a view of the North Shore, and each of those red points there is a septic system. Yeah, and so the entire North Shore, basically, the entire North Shore of the river is on septic. And something that is really quite astounding to me, this figure, I finally just got this last year from my friends at Department of Public Works. And they calculated that each septic system, these are systems that are working perfectly, not systems that are in trouble, perfectly working systems will release the amount of nitrogen into the water every year equivalent to 53,000 gallons of a sewage spill. Each system. And look at how many there are here in this area. So, you can see that there's going to be plenty of nitrogen that's going to be flowing 24/7 throughout the year into our waterways from these septic systems. Now, while we're looking at this, I do want to mention that from about here, which is on the edge of the greenway here, all the way back to the river and onto the other side of the river, this whole area here may, in the future, be able to be on sewer. So I'll give you a link at the very end where you can contact the county and try to get on a list for having your community. They want to do it by community, having your community be converted to sewer from septic. From the Greenway over to Downs Park, this area will probably never have sewer. It's just not slated, at least not in our lifetime, not in my lifetime, that's for sure. But those systems could be upgraded to the nitrogen-reducing systems. And that's done through the health department, and they also have funding available to people. And I didn't mention, there is funding available for this sewer to septic conversion. It is expensive, so it's going to take a while to get them done. But you can see it could make a great difference in water quality if we could get some of this nitrogen not to be flowing into the river. And then, of course, we just have this cartoon here of stormwater to remind us that whenever there's fertilizer on the lawn or around our plantings that has not been taken up by the plants, every time it rains, it's going to flow with stormwater into the creeks. And other things will flow in there too, pet waste and oil, but the nutrients are the ones that are most concerning. So we need to find ways to cut back on nutrients coming into the river, both by septic conversions and by being more careful with fertilizer. And the sediment work, you're going to hear more about that from Brad, because he runs the program where we actually do monitor construction sites to make sure that they are not releasing sediments. But it's something we have to keep on top of all the time. All right, so now what we have, and again, this map is in your newsletter. What I did is I took each of the stations that we monitor. So we have 30 stations that we monitor in 22. We have 5 teams of monitors, many of whom are here this evening. And they go out every 2 weeks from mid-April to mid-October and do the water quality measurements. So they have Secchi discs, and they measure the Secchi disc depth, and they also measure through the water column, not only oxygen, but also salinity and conductivity and pH and temperature. So we have a lot of data from all of these sites for that growing season. And for this graph, or for this map, I've used just those 2 parameters to give an index to the individual stations, because we don't really have a goal for the grasses for the individual stations. But we can take a look at what bottom dissolved oxygen and water clarity tell us. And the great news about this is how much each of these sites improved in 22. Of the 30 sites that we sample, 22 of them were improved from 21. So that's, or from 2021. So that's, and particularly I was really happy to see these blue points here. So between 36 and 40% of the time, we attain these good oxygen and water clarity values. On the South Shore here, where we often have had poor water quality. But this is also the area where a lot of the restorations have been done, and where the construction monitoring group has been very vigilant. So perhaps that has something to do with the improved water quality. We would like to think so. You can see what Paul was talking about, the black dot for Cattail Creek. So we have Cattail Creek here, and we do measure all the way at the end of Cattail Creek. This is the one site that we don't include in the index that I showed you before for the whole river, because it's the only creek where we measure at the very headwaters. All these other creeks, we measure more at midpoint. So, but this is right just below the Berrywood restoration. And you would think with all that restoration work that it would be better water quality than that. But still, the problem is there's a lot of stuff going on upstream from there. That 2.5-mile project that Paul mentioned is, if we ever could get that going, that might help us see better water quality at Cattail. But even at the midpoint in Cattail Creek, we see that we're down to between 20 and 25% of the goals. And the other side here, this red, this is Deep Creek here. This definitely has some issues here with material flowing in. And over here at Little Magothy, we're at the orange area, 26 to 30. So not great, but better than, sort of in between. But now in the open water, we're seeing really good water quality. On the North Shore, really good water quality. So this is what each individual station would look like. Now, I wanted to do a comparison here. We've been looking at the salinity as kind of an index of rainfall, in a sense. We can use it as an index of rainfall, because when we have greater rainfall, we have less salinity. And you remember in 2017 or 2018, that was the year when we had like 70 inches of rain. Our average is 50, but we got 70 that year. It was a hugely wet year. And you can see that the salinity actually, it started going up okay, but by July we had all that rain the rest of the summer, and we had this very low salinity. So that tells us, about all this material that was coming in along with the rainwater. There was plenty of stormwater coming in. But in 22, in this last year, what you can see is that we had pretty high salinity. Only, the second highest here. We had, it was just a little bit higher in 2017 there, but you can see we had high salinity, which it's good for oysters. Oysters do their best. They tend to spawn, they release their gametes when the salinity is about 14 parts per thousand. Maybe a little bit less, but I think 14 is often used as the cutoff. So you can see we're pretty close here. There's 15 right there. So we're almost at the point where oysters could naturally reproduce in the river with this kind of salinity. So that's great. But we can also see that probably we have to attribute some of the improvement in water quality in 22 to the fact that we had less rain. Less rain, fewer nutrients coming in, fewer sediments coming in. So there's always that weather component, that climate component, I guess you could say, that we have to consider. So combination of less rain and effort brings us better water quality. All right. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at what happens during the year when we're not doing our monitoring. And one of our monitors, who's not here today, was interested when would we have the best water quality. And he actually monitors 3 sites for us and has been doing that for many, many years. Deep Creek, that one that you saw there that was having a little bit of trouble. Lake Placid, so that's over on the, on the Arnold side there. And Olmsted, and that site, Olmsted site, is almost at the open water. It's at the Olmsted Community Pier, if you know where that is. So it's pretty much where there's a lot of good circulation. So we have these 3 sites that he actually went to every month for the year. So we were able to plot these data, and he just finished up. This is just last week's data here from March. We got those last points on here. So what I wanted to show you is that, we talk about poor bottom dissolved oxygen, less than 5 milligrams per liter, but you can see it's only like that when we're measuring it. The rest of the time, in the fall, or in the spring and in the fall and winter, it's way better. So if we could, you could really see the impact of temperature here on dissolved oxygen. There's a couple of things going on here, some biological, some kind of physical. Cold water holds more oxygen than warm water, so there's that. And there's also the fact that there's less decomposition on the bottom in the wintertime when the water's cold, and so we tend not to lose the oxygen to decomposition during the cold weather. And then in the warmer weather, we've got all that respiration going on, taking up oxygen, and we've also got warmer water that doesn't hold as much oxygen. So we got a couple things going on there for oxygen. And then we can look at water clarity also for these same sites. And so what's interesting here, again, we see the same kind of pattern here where it's better in the fall, in the fall and in the winter. But notice what happened here. We had this really good clarity here, a 2.5 meter Secchi depth. That's a great clarity in November. And then it went crashing down in December. And you can see it went back up, and then it came crashing back down again. And so this is a site that's close to the main stem. And does anybody here remember what happened here on the main stem of the river, or on the creeks also in December and January of this year? We had mahogany tides. The water looked like that. Now this is the Cattail Creek site. The water looks like that with mahogany tide. So this is the issue that we have with lots of algal growth. So here we are. We had really good water clarity, and then boom, this mahogany tide comes in, and water clarity drops way down. And so mahogany tide is caused by a microscopic algae called Prorocentrum minimum. It doesn't have a common name because you can't really see it. A dime is about 1 millimeter thick. So 10 micrometers is about, what do we got? A tenth of actually a hundredth of the width of a dime, so microscopic. And these guys come in and they grow like crazy. Again, they only last for a couple of weeks and then they drop out. So that's what we're seeing there with those peaks in salinity, in clarity, is those peaks. And I wanted to show you one other thing that was interesting about these data is that, if I can get back to that, there, is that a deep creek didn't really have so much in the way of the algal bloom there, but they were dredging. They were dredging in Deep Creek last winter, or in December, January, they were dredging. So you can see what happens when you dredge. You also get poor water clarity. So all kinds of things go on in the river, and if we sample, the more we sample, the more information we have. All right. So the grasses. So this is our data from Bayland. Unfortunately, they only did the one creek this year. So this is Mill Creek right here. And they found 5 acres of the early season grass called horn pondweed. So we were able to use those 5 acres to add to our total grasses. And then here is the data from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And so all the green here, the dark green and the light green, these are all areas where they found the grasses. So altogether they found 81 acres. Last year it was 61 acres, so good improvement. And you can see where a lot of the grass is. It's over here in this Eagle Cove area, up into Cornfield Creek. This is where our best, most reliable grass populations are. But we also have these scattered areas and little ponds here and there, little inlets that we see. And this is Grays Creek here, so good grasses there in Grays Creek. You know, little spots here and there around the river, a little bit here down in the Little Magothy. So we can't tell from here what the grasses are. So that's why we have we have kayakers, volunteer kayakers that go out and paddle around the areas where the grasses are and do the identification of grasses so we can say what they are. And these are the grasses that we see primarily in the Magothy. It's good to see such diversity of grasses. Actually, it's quite diverse. This is the early season grass, horned pondweed. It comes out in May, and it's pretty much gone by mid to late June. And that's the one that you can see when you're out on the water in certain areas, like we go down to St. Michael's at that time of year, and you see huge rafts of this grass out floating on the bay there. We don't have the huge rafts of that here, but it does kind of let go from its roots in June and floats around, and that's how it gets its seeds dispersed. So that's our early season grass. And then the rest of these are seen throughout the rest of the summer. So they're there from June up until through October. They're going to be there. And so this one grass here, the wild celery, does best in the lower salinity water. So we see that more in areas where there's fresh water coming in. But the rest of these grasses are seen wherever there's a typical salinity that you would see in the creeks and the river. So when we have really good grass growth, this is what it looks like if you've never seen it out there in the river. It's really dense. These are pictures that were taken from Eagle Cove. I took them in 21, but it looked the same way in 22. So you can see how dense they can be. And it's that kind of density that we see that provides that great habitat. Fish and crabs will go in there and hide in those grasses. And when they're there on the water surface and a boat comes by, they will calm down the waves. So it's really, really helpful to have these grasses in the river. All right, so so that's part of it for the index, and then just a few other things I wanted to talk to you about. One is the bacterial water quality, fecal bacterial water quality, that is important for those of us who like to swim or recreate in the water. So Operation Clearwater is a program that's been going on. Actually, I started it here at the community college, and now Tammy Demansky runs it. And these are the sites where she samples. Everyone here with the blue dot are the sites where she samples. So she hires students from the college who will go out every week or 2 weeks, depending on the community, and collect water samples, bring them back to the lab, and she's able to enumerate the enterococci. These are the bacteria that we count. These are similar to E. coli. They are found in the feces of warm-blooded animals. If they've recently come into the river, then we will be able to count them. So it's an indicator of recent fecal contamination of the water. So I can show you, so these are the different sites. I think it's easier, rather than look at these numbers here, it's easier to look at the numbers this way. So these are the bacterial counts that Tammy's group found for us in 22. So these are all the sites that she sampled. We asked her to sample this year, MRA asked her to sample at Beechwood Park, because that's a good public access site. And we also asked her to sample for the second year at Dobbins. So you can see Dobbins is really tiny. Where's Dobbins on here? Right there. You can see really good water quality at Dobbins. So what I did here is put these two graphs so you can see the impact of stormwater on our counts. So when you look at the orange, all dates, so that includes good weather and when it's been raining. So you can see what those numbers look like. And then if you pull out the rain dates, you can see what kind of counts you would have. And really the only site that gave us particular trouble with or without rain was Deep Creek. Most of these other sites, most of the time, were good. This dotted line across here is at 35 enteric oxide per 100 mil. And so that tells us that most of the time, as a matter of fact, when you do the calculation, 85% of the time, sites throughout the watershed are good for recreational use. But it does remind us when we see those higher counts after the rain, those ones that are in orange versus green, it does remind us that there are, if we have had a heavy rain, and by that I mean anything more than ½ an inch, that's the cutoff for the heavy rain. You can often just see the water looks terrible, and it is terrible. You don't want to be in it for about 48 hours after a heavy rain, because not only are the sediments in there, but there's also plenty of enteric oxide in there, and the counts can be quite high. And these are just indicators that there could be other bacteria there that would be harmful. So you don't want to really be, particularly as the river gets warmer later in the summer, in August, you don't want to be in the river 48 hours after a heavy rain until after 48 hours. Okay, and if we just compare year to year, here's an 11-year comparison, you can see that generally we've had good bacterial water quality always. If we were to include the bacterial water quality in our report card, it would be, would definitely bring our numbers up. But the problem is that we don't do all the same sites every year. This is done by communities who sign up, except for the two that we commissioned. It's done by communities who sign up to be sampled. And so it varies from year to year. So we can't really use this as part of our index because it would vary too much from year to year. Okay, so Operation Clearwater is going to be starting up in May, and Tammy has the applications out there. She's doing them all online this year, and this link that's here is in your newsletter. If you're interested in signing up, just click on that link and you can go to the application. And there is a charge for it. I'm not sure. Tammy, what's the charge this year? Where's Tammy? Yes, okay. So it's not a lot of money, and if you have a community, particularly if you have little kids that swim in the water, I think it's a really great idea to at least go with the 7 weeks so that you know what kind of water quality you have. And so also Tammy's website is there, or Tammy's email is there. Okay, just a few other points there, highlights of the year. I wanted to just mention about the Magothy Greenway Natural Area. So this is up in Pasadena. That huge area, 380 acres, that is in a conservation easement with the Magothy River Land Trust. And in the past, we have had only a couple of trails. We've had the yellow and the red trail that have been marked out for many years. So this is Looper's Field right here when you drive by it. This is Lakeshore Road here, and this is North Shore Road. So that's where we are here. And over the last year, Ranger Nick Shearman has gotten a bunch of people together, and they have cleared a bunch of new trails. So it's really nice. They've got some on this side of North Shore Road, the purple and the blue. This one goes down here to some kind of boggy areas, which are cool to see. And then even across the road, he's put a little crosswalk in here. You can cross North Shore Road and hike over on these trails. So it's really great. We had our first day hike there on January 1st, and we had a good number of people there. So that QR code, if you want to take your phone and I think you could probably do it from where you're sitting, you can get this map by just clicking on that QR code and get the trail map. Or you can just go to Park and Rec site, and also you'll find it there. So here's our Jim Crafton, the president of Magothy River Land Trust. And so this land is indeed all in easement with the Magothy River Land Trust. Okay, and we have to, of course, mention the yellow perch as a highlight. We had really good activity with the yellow perch spawning last year. They spawned way up just below the dam at Lake Waterford. And here are these fish just swimming upstream. They can't wait to get up there. And these are probably all the males coming up, and the females are already up there. They lay their eggs, and the eggs form these huge chains that look like this. They're about 2 feet long. They're really big. And the males have already fertilized them, and there they are inside there, millions of eggs in each of these egg sacs. And we had very good spawning in 22. And again, we just finished the spawning season of 23. And again, we had really good spawning activity. So I think we have now really a sustainable fishery for the yellow perch, even if Department of Natural Resources doesn't think so. We think so. And then we were finally able to have our picnic in person this year. So in September, we had a picnic at Lake Waterford. It was the first time many of us had been able to see each other for years. So that was fun. And we hope, many of you will come to our picnic next year. So tons of people, we are an all-volunteer organization. We could not do this work without all the volunteers that are here. So we have our water quality monitors, our board members, project leaders, and I also wanted to give a special call out to Mike McGuire and Alan Flincham, because they are both, letting us benefit from their businesses. Mike McGuire takes the reef balls out, and you're going to hear more about that from Lisa. And Alan stores all the reef balls on his property, so we couldn't do this work without him. And of course, MRA members and supporters, that's where we get the funding. So we thank you very much for that. We can use volunteers. Often people, they send us emails. They say, my kid's looking for a project, or I'm looking for a project, and what can I do? So we can take volunteers for the SAV monitoring. We do a little training there. So I teach you how to use the Secchi disc and how to identify the grasses. And you can go out by kayak and give us some reports on the grasses. Brad's going to talk about the construction site monitoring. He also was involved in the oyster cages at piers. So we can always use volunteers for those projects. Andrea and Charles work on the living history videos, and they're always looking for good stories. So those links are also in your newsletter. And of course, if you're not a member of Magothy River Association, we'll help you join. It's for individual, it's $25. It's a deal. Okay, so of course, just to reiterate a little bit about we don't want stuff washing off our lawns. So replacing grasses, native, turf, replacing turf with native plants is great, especially trees. Putting in rain gardens, not fertilizing, particularly in the spring. This is a really bad time to fertilize, because any fertilizer that's not taken up by your plants is going to wash right into the storm drains and right into the creeks. So they have a phrase that they use, fertilize in fall, if at all. So that will help the river a lot. And of course, pesticides and herbicides. Composting leaves is always a great thing. So this is the website for the Department of Public Works, Our Water. Notice the 2 double capital A's there for Arundel. So if you just go to Our Water on Google, you will pull up this website. And you'll see a lot of great stuff that they're doing. And particularly, you'll find out about converting from septic to sewer if your community can do that. There's maps on there showing which communities are eligible and information on how to apply for that.